I'm not surprised that Worf and Dax's Star Trek Deep Space Nine wedding didn't have these characters attend. When it comes to Star Trek weddings, the union of Lieutenant Commander Worf and Lieutenant Jadzia Dax in Deep Space Nine Season 6's You Are Cordially Invited stands as one of the most memorable in franchise history. It had Klingon traditions, a chaotic bachelor party, and just enough heartfelt character moments to make it both fun and surprisingly poignant. Yet for all the spectacle, what stands out on a rewatch isn't just the love story at its heart, it's the absence of certain familiar faces. The guest list felt noticeably trimmed, and while fans have speculated for years about why particular characters weren't present, the truth is that it actually makes perfect sense. In fact, when you look closely at the narrative choices and the in-universe logic, you can argue that Worf and Dax's wedding was always going to be more intimate, and several key Star Trek characters were never destined to be part of it. Let's dive into the reasons and the missing names. The context of the wedding. You Are Cordially Invited comes at a pivotal moment in DS9. The Dominion War is raging, Starfleet is stretched thin, and Deep Space Nine itself has only just been retaken from the Cardassians and the Dominion. In other words, this wasn't a time for a sprawling, guest-filled ceremony. Klingon weddings are also not exactly known for open invitations. They're more akin to trials of worthiness than receptions. Worf's adherence to Klingon culture made the event less about throwing a Grand Federation-friendly party and more about observing deeply personal traditions. In fact, much of the conflict of the episode stems from whether Jadzia can live up to Klingon standards of honor and strength, as judged by Martok's formidable wife, Sorella. So right from the outset, the show sets the stage for a wedding where the inner circle matters, and outsiders were always going to be excluded. Why certain DS9 regulars made the cut? It's worth noting who did attend. Benjamin Sisko, Worf's commanding officer and Jadzia's closest friend, was naturally there. Kira Nerys, Quark, O'Brien, Bashir, and Odo also featured prominently in the build-up, whether in comedic subplots or as part of the bachelor/bachelorette chaos. Even Martok, who wasn't part of the station's command structure but had become Worf's surrogate father figure, was central to the ceremony. This makes sense. These are the people who lived and worked with Worf and Jadzia every day. The DS9 ensemble is already tight-knit, and the show worked best when it leaned into the found family dynamic of the crew. But when you start thinking about the broader Star Trek family, it's easy to wonder why others weren't even mentioned. Where was the Next Generation crew? The most obvious absence is Worf's old Next Generation crewmates. After all, Worf spent 7 years on the Enterprise D, building friendships that fans loved, his camaraderie with Geordi, his rivalry-turned brotherhood with Riker, his mutual respect with Picard. For many fans, it felt strange that none of them showed up to one of the most important events in Worf's life. But narratively, their absence is unsurprising. Here's why. 1. The war made travel impossible. At this point in the timeline, the Dominion War was stretching Starfleet resources to their limits. Long-range travel for social reasons would have been nearly impossible. Picard, Riker, and the Enterprise E-crew had their own responsibilities, defending the Federation on a galactic scale. 2. Worf was always a lone wolf. Part of Worf's arc across both TNG and DS9 was his tendency to separate himself from others. He respected and admired his Enterprise comrades, but he was never the type to lean on them for personal milestones. In fact, Worf's stoic independence explains why he bonded so strongly with Martok instead of calling on Picard for support during his courtship of Jadzia. 3. Behind-the-scenes reality. From a production standpoint, DS9 simply wasn't going to bring in the expensive TNG cast for a cameo-heavy episode. Budgets, contracts, and the desire to keep DS9's ensemble front and center meant that fans weren't going to see Riker giving a best man speech or Geordi tinkering with the champagne replicators. So while fans may have dreamed of a crossover wedding, Worf's ties to his past were deliberately left off-screen to emphasize his present and future with Jadzia and the DS9 crew. Why Spock and other Federation figures weren't invited? Some fans also wondered about larger Federation icons. After all, Worf had personal ties to characters like Spock from TNG's Unification, and Dax had lifetimes of connections across the quadrant. Shouldn't someone like Admiral Ross or even an old Trill friend have shown up? Again, it comes down to the narrative focus. You Are Cordially Invited wasn't about celebrating Jadzia and Worf's galaxy-wide connections. It was about proving that their immediate family, Martok, Sisko, Kira, and the station crew were the only witnesses that mattered. Bringing in outside dignitaries would have diluted that intimacy and shifted the spotlight away from the episode's central tension. Could Jadzia win the respect of Klingon tradition, and in doing so, prove worthy of Worf? The awkward absence of Alexander. If there's one omission that still sticks out, though, it's Alexander Rozhenko, Worf's son. By season 6 of DS9, Alexander wasn't on the show, and the writers largely avoided addressing him. But in universe, his absence is glaring. A Klingon wedding, one of the most significant moments in his father's life, and Alexander wasn't present? It actually fits with Worf's character, though. His relationship with Alexander had always been strained, defined by Worf's struggle to reconcile fatherhood with his own strict adherence to Klingon honor. By the time of DS9, Alexander was largely estranged, and Worf may have believed that including him in such a ceremony would have been more awkward than meaningful. Still, this is one of those cases where narrative logic and emotional resonance don't quite align. Fans might accept that Alexander wasn't there, but it highlights the sometimes cold, compartmentalized way Worf lived his life. Why it works better without them. In the end, the absences strengthen the episode. Worf and Jadzia's wedding isn't meant to be a Federation spectacle. It's not Will Riker and Deanna Troy's starfleet-filling ceremony from Nemesis. It's not even Sisko and Cassidy's quiet, domestic marriage later in DS9. Instead, it's personal and rooted in Klingon culture colliding with Federation sensibilities. Bringing in outsiders would have undercut that. Imagine if Picard had shown up, it would have shifted focus from Martok's mentorship. Imagine if Geordi or Beverly had been there, the narrative would have felt like a TNG reunion instead of a DS9 milestone. By trimming the guest list, the writers forced the story inward onto Jadzia's struggle, Worf's pride, and the found family of Deep Space Nine. The beauty of You Are Cordially Invited. Despite its absences, or maybe because of them, You Are Cordially Invited is one of DS9's best ensemble episodes. It balances humor. The bachelor party scenes are some of the funniest in the series, with Hart Martok's acceptance of Jadzia feels truly earned. The ceremony itself is small but powerful, a testament to both characters' journeys. The missing characters remind us of a truth that DS9 often emphasized. The galaxy is vast, but what matters most are the people standing beside you in the fight. Worf and Jadzia didn't need the Enterprise crew, admirals, or old acquaintances. They needed Martok, Sisko, Kira, Bashir, O'Brien, and Odo. They needed the family that had become theirs in the crucible of war. And in Enda,